So hello, you're watching the Hub Online Network. I am here with physical distancing with Barbara Roden. She is in studio, but again, we are keeping our social distance.
Hand sanitizer, lots of hand sanitizer.
So Barbara, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you, Gareth. It's certainly trying times, interesting times, worrying times, but I think, yeah, just one day at a time. It's a cliche, but it's a good thing to be doing these days. You just take it one day at a time.
Now we're going to get into all of the COVID-19 stuff happening in Ashcroft and all that in a little bit. Because this is the first interview that I have with you as mayor. We have interviewed you as the newspaper editor once before. You can see that on the Hub Online Network YouTube channel. But this is the first time as mayor, so we're going to start at the beginning before we start talking about COVID stuff. So one of the things I ask all of the people in their first interview is, how and why did you get started in politics to begin with?
Oh, well, I was elected to Ashcroft Council in 2014. I ran as a councillor and was honored to be elected as a councillor, and I've lived here, at this point in time, I've lived here for 23 years. So I'd already lived here for quite some time. My son was born here. It's been a great place to live. It's a wonderful community. I love the people, I love the community, and it's a cliche, but I wanted to give back to the community in another way. And it felt like running for council was a way that I could do that and use some of the skills I had, I hoped, to be able to help the community of Ashcroft, help the people of Ashcroft. So I ran and was elected and got myself on council.
And so now you're mayor. So what's the difference, in your opinion, between being just a councillor, and I shouldn't say just a councillor because councillor is not just a job, but being councillor and being mayor? What is your personal view as the dichotomy between the two jobs?
Well, it's kind of interesting. We have here what's called a weak mayor system, in that there are 5 people on council, myself and 4 councillors. And I do not have some kind of super vote. And some people think that if it's a tied vote, 2 for, 2 against, I get to do a casting vote or break a tie, or my vote casts more weight. No, we each have 1 vote. That's it. Each one counts the same. I'd say the main difference is the amount of involvement you have in the number of meetings. So that's 2 main differences. Lots and lots more meetings. As a councillor, you do go already to a lot of meetings above and beyond the council meetings every month. As mayor, there are a lot more of those. And it hasn't really slowed down in the last few weeks. Some meetings have been canceled, but a lot of them are still continuing via other means, via Zoom or teleconferencing, video conferencing. But there are other meetings that I'm going to now that I would not be going to if it weren't for the COVID-19 situation. So that's a big difference. You're meeting with a lot more people. You're involved with a lot more committees and organizations as mayor. The Thompson-Nicola Regional District, for example, you have a seat on the board of the TNRD as mayor of a TNRD municipality. And there was a span of 2 weeks where I had 2 board meetings, a hospital board meeting, and Thompson-Nicola Invasive Plant Management Committee meeting. I'm on that committee. That's one of the ones I'm on. So those are all trips into Kamloops, usually. Now we're doing our board meetings by telephone. But so that's a lot of driving back and forth to Kamloops for those meetings. So it's a lot more in terms of workload and in terms of involvement.
So it's interesting you talk about how you don't have a super vote. My original understanding of councils were that the mayor doesn't vote to begin with. And it's just, the councillors put forward a motion, the councillors vote on it, the mayor's there kind of to oversee the proceedings, and then if there is a tie, the mayor would then vote. So that's how I thought it was when I first started this job. And then I kept seeing both you and Mayor Tallarico raising your hand for everything. So that dissuaded me pretty quickly. So thank you for clarifying that. What do we got next? So, what are some of the challenges that you've had to face so far as either councillor or mayor? And then what have been some of the bigger successes that you've been able to achieve in your tenure as both councillors and mayor?
Okay, well, kind of setting aside the COVID-19 pandemic, which I think we're going to be getting to. As councillor, obviously, the biggest thing by far was the 2017 wildfires. And the circumstances of it here in Ashcroft in the first 36 hours, where the wildfires and then the lack of communications because we had no cell phones and landlines, we had no internet, computer unless you went to higher ground, we had no electricity. One of our reservoirs ran dry up on the mesa, for example, on the second day because we weren't able to pump water up to it anymore. We had no electricity. And so that perfect storm of things happening, and it wasn't just happening here. I mean, talking to Kevin Skrepnik, who was then with the BC Wildfire Service, he said they were dealing with fires all over the province, big fires all over that had all struck within 24, 48 hours of each other. They were already dealing with a big one up at 108 Mile. And then on July 6th, 7th, all over the province, fires just exploded. And it was like nothing they'd ever seen. So we were one big fire of several big fires, and people were scrambling to get the resources out to them. So that was something that no one could plan for. And it was a scary time. It was a worrying time. I learned a lot. I didn't want to ever have to go through anything like that again, and here we are in 2020. So be careful what you wish for, I guess. So that was certainly the biggest challenge. Another challenge and a success in the end was the new water treatment plant. That was very challenging to start with because even though we were successful in getting a major grant from the federal and provincial governments, we still had to go to the people of Ashcroft and ask for permission to borrow up to $4.1 million to fund our portion of the water treatment plant. And that was very difficult at the beginning. It's legislation. If you had a one treatment water plant system, the provincial government said you have to go to a two treatment system. That's it. And we had people saying, well, just say no. Just say no to the government. Tell them no, we can't afford it. Well, we can't, it's legislation. We can't say no. And we found at the time there were very few tools from the province to help us because we're not water treatment plant experts. We're not engineers. We're not people who work for interior health and are, can talk about viruses and all this. So we actually went to the government and said, we're pretty far along in the process now, so this isn't really going to help us. But for other municipalities that will be facing this, and there will be a lot of them, you need to provide more practical help. You need to provide more information for elected officials to be able to talk to members of the public and explain why we're doing this, why it's necessary, and what the result will be. Because we didn't have a lot of that, so we were kind of going by our experience, hoping that, if you can't be a good example, you can at least serve as a horrible warning. So we were trying to be the horrible warning to maybe provide other municipalities with that. But then it ended up being a triumph, because after we got the grant money, when we finally got approval to go ahead with the loan, we had 2 seasons in a row of terrible turbidity. The freshet was incredibly strong. We were having NTU, 75 NTU, and anything above 5 is a boil water notice. That's it. So it's coming in at 75. Anyone who remembers that, it looked like chocolate milk. It was terrible. And after two successive years of that, it went from why do we need to build a new water treatment plant to when is the new water treatment plant coming online? Because we put up a test filter after we decided what kind of filters we were going to use. We put up a test. And it was during the freshet in 2017, which was terrible. And water was coming in at 75 NTU, and it was going through the test filter, and it was coming out at, I think, 0.18 NTUs. So that was just amazing to me, the difference that it made. And in the end, thanks to a lot of great work by village staff, village crew, by all the people involved in constructing it. We have ended up, instead of borrowing up to 4.1 million, we ended up borrowing, I think, 1.2 million. So considerably less than we had asked permission for. And we had money left over from the grants from the province and the federal government to go ahead with 2 more water treatment plant associated projects that were on our wish list and that were really too pricey for us to go ahead with without a grant. And they said, yeah, sure, you can use the extra money to go ahead with those projects.
Oh,
So,
there you go.
yeah.
So then, what are some of the things that so those are things that have happened and some things that, you know, I guess were plans for Ashcroft as a whole. But you must have joined for a reason. What are some of the things that you personally wanted to see or still want to see change in Ashcroft? What's your vision?
I wanted to see not community engagement, because I think we're very fortunate. Ashcroft is a community with a lot of really engaged people, whether it's in volunteer organizations, it's coming out to help, whether it's being involved in their community or supporting organizations in the community. I just wanted to see more of that and to be able to help organizations that are maybe struggling a little bit. So we give grants and aid to different organizations where we try to help organizations like the Hub is a really good example. When they first started up in 2015, they came to us and asked for a grant and aid, and I believe we'd already, our grant and aid budget was exhausted. We'd already given out the amount we budget. And as a council, we said, we will give them a grant and aid. We'll find the money from somewhere else because this is a really good venture. This is something that is going to be really positive for our community, and we want to support it and encourage it at this early stage, because if it doesn't get that encouragement now when it's trying to get off the ground, it won't get off the ground. So it's things like that that I'm really happy to do, and it's things that bring Ashcroft to the attention of the wider world. I've had so many people say, you know, this is just such an undiscovered gem. People, and it's not just people who live here who are kind of biased, it's people coming from outside who come to Ashcroft and they, wow, the mosaics, the Heritage Park, what a beautiful facility you've got there, what a beautiful town, the setting. So it's trying to get that out to people that hey, you know, it's worth driving, it's worth turning off the highway. Because I've had so many people say, I've lived in Kamloops for 27 years and I've driven past the turnoff to Ashcroft I don't know how many times, and this is my first time here, and wow, I'm glad I did it. Okay, how can we encourage more people to do that? Because that's what we need, to come here, even if it's just that first time. That's why I've been really pushing to get electric vehicle charging stations here. Partly because it shows that we're a forward-thinking community. We've always been a transportation hub. That's how we started, so it makes sense for us to continue that in the 21st century after starting in the 19th. But it also is a way of getting people to come to town and stop, even if it's just for an hour or two while they charge their car. Because if we can get them off the highway to stop for an hour or two for that first time while they charge the car, if it's July and it's 37 degrees, they're not sitting in their car while it charges. They're out going to the stores, they're going to a restaurant, they're going to the bakery for an ice cream cone, or they're going to Unity for a coffee or something. So you get them here that first time, they get that little look around, hopefully they'll, wow, this looks like a really cool little town. You know, we've got to keep going, we've got to be in Prince George by 6 or whatever, but we've got to come back here again and spend more time. So that's, I think, you do it slowly and steadily, but it's just that getting the word out about the community. It's a great place to come and visit, and it's a great place to live.
So this isn't on the necessarily approved list of questions. Not that there's an approved list of questions, but we did talk about topics of discussion beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the questions that we did have from a member of the public at a recent open house that we had is, and this is in my opinion tandem with that last bit that you were talking about, what other businesses could we have in Ashcroft, or should we encourage to have in Ashcroft, that might be able to help with, and this is of course your opinion, in attracting people to come here?
I think one thing is we need to build on our artistic, not heritage, that's not the right word, our reputation as an arts community. The mosaics, of course, are absolutely fantastic. They are really putting us on the map. We have so many talented artists here in so many fields. We've got murals up around town. We have wonderful artists, Angela and Rob at Roll Gear have the sidewalk gallery there. So they showcase different artists. So I think that's one thing we can do is really build on that. As far, shops, I mean, people, I lived in England for 5 years, and the complaint there was every main street in every town looks the same because you've got the identical same big chain stores all next to each other. And I think that's where small towns again can beat out their bigger rivals or competitors or other big towns, because you can get those funky little one-of-a-kind boutiques and shops that are unique to Ashcroft. So try and encourage that. Something that I'd like to see here, and I know it's been a massive struggle, is a dog park. And the number one roadblock to that is a location, because the village of Ashcroft owns very little property itself. You look around Ashcroft and all you see is empty space. Well, we don't own it. So the difficulty is finding a location and finding the funding for it, because that's something else that gets people to stop off on the highway. The same way that people with electric vehicles check a map before they head out. Okay, where can I stop and charge up my car on the way? People, out traveling with their pets, very fond of their dogs. They want a place to have, Fido go for a run. So they'll look for communities with off-leash dog parks and plan their journey accordingly. So that's something else. And then another thing, of course, a big thing that we hear about time and again is housing, accommodation of various sorts. That's a huge thing, and I think every community in the province is struggling with this one. Is what kind of accommodation are people looking for, and how do you provide that?
So having gone around town and talked to several people, trying to make a list of questions to talk to our councillors and of course you about, there aren't a lot necessarily, but there are some critics. And again, this is another question off of the board that's just popping into my head, so I apologize for not talking about this in advance. How do you, this is on the list, never mind. How do you people don't necessarily critique you and the council. A lot of people have said the council's doing a fantastic job. But when you do come across critics about how you guys are doing your job, how do you handle that negativity, if it's not constructive criticism? If the person addresses it to me, or I become aware of it because it's an email that's come in, or someone stops me, or whatever. Education is always a big thing. Often it comes from a place of not understanding the reason why council made a particular decision, or the process to arrive at a decision. I mean, something that you get a lot is government acts so slowly. And it does. I totally agree. Government can act excruciatingly slowly, frustratingly slowly in a lot of cases. And sometimes, yes, you can expedite the process, but I have to, it's important to explain to people why it takes a long time, and that's because what we're doing affects an entire community. So you don't want to rush that decision, because if you rush a decision and get it enacted, you start finding all sorts of lapses, all sorts of things you hadn't considered. And so it's important that you take the time to do it properly, so that people have input, so that it can be looked at from every angle, so that you have the opportunity to have a lot of different people go, something that's missing that really needs to be here is X. Because, we're seeing this kind of with the COVID-19, with the community, the emergency response benefits that are coming out. And so it was initially announced it's going to be available for this range of employees. And now you see things constantly being added to it. And this is, I'm not trying to blame the federal government. It's not a fault. It's just, that's what happens when you rush an important piece of legislation or an important government decision through, is you overlook a lot of things, and it's not because you're trying to overlook them, it's just because you're doing it fast. And you're not giving that time to really look at it and consider it from every angle, which is what you have to do. Because once you enact a bylaw, there it is.
It is what it is, and to try to fix it, it's easier to make it right before you enact it than to enact it and then go back and fix it. That's, the best thing. So the education piece, to make a long answer short, the education piece is really important. And then there are some people who just are not, they're anti-government. Whether it's here in Ashcroft, whether it's the provincial government, whether it's the federal government, and that's fine. It's a free world. People can have their opinions, and I don't have to disagree with them, just as they don't have to agree with me. But it can be tough. I mean, sometimes you'll read the odd comment which is quite personal, or nasty. I haven't had too many of them. One or two, and it makes me sad, and it does hurt because I'm not a thick-skinned person. I'm not a Donald Trump or a Boris Johnson where it just kind of bounces off. So I just have to tell myself, well, I'm doing the best I can. Everything I do for the good of the village of Ashcroft as far as I am able. So as long as I can tell myself, I made this decision, and I know why I made this decision, and I made it because I think this is the best decision for Ashcroft at this time. As long as I can tell myself that, then I think, okay, there are going to be people who don't agree, and that's the way it goes.
So talking about, just as an aside to that, talking about forming bylaws, something that I personally think about is you form bylaws, but we have no bylaw officer.
Mm-hmm.
How does that affect the processes of coming up with, how the town is regulated
Mm-hmm.
and that sort of thing?
That's a really good question, Kara, and it comes up a lot in small municipalities, especially, which tend not to have bylaw officers. Well, what's the point of having a bylaw if there's no one to enforce it? Well, first of all, we do have people to enforce it. Our corporate officer is able to enforce bylaws. And the way we do it in Ashcroft is we put a bylaw in place so that everyone knows the expectation. And most people will understand and they'll abide by it. So the approach we take is educate. It's complaint driven. If someone complains about a bylaw infraction, then it will be followed up. It's just because we don't have a bylaw officer doesn't mean it falls into a black hole. We will follow up, and we prefer to take the approach of education. And 9 times out of 10, a letter sorts it out. People weren't aware that there was a bylaw infraction happening, or they weren't aware that it was an issue for someone, and most people are more than happy to comply. So that's the approach we take. And you have to have the bylaws, because if you have a bylaw, then you can deal with situations as they emerge. If you don't have a bylaw and a situation emerges, your hands are really tied. For example, before we brought in 2017, actually, just before the wildfires, we brought in a watering system. Because up until then, it was a free-for-all. You could water whenever you wanted, for however long you wanted, and we used massive amounts of water because we live in a desert, but people want to have beautiful lawns and gardens like they live in Richmond. So we brought in the 4-stage watering. Stage 1 is, it goes in May 1st and ends on September 30th, and on even days, even numbered addresses can water between these times, and on odd days, odd numbered. And then stage 2, you can do less with water. And then stage 3, until you get to stage 4, which is basically emergency only. You don't use water unless it's for an emergency. And so my son said to me at the time, what happened up until then? Until you had that in place, what happened? I said, we would have had to go ask nicely for people not to use lots of water if we needed to go to something like a stage 4. We would have had no official way to enforce that. So that's why you have bylaws, is so that you can deal with situations as they emerge. And then, as I said, 9 times out of 10, education goes a long way.
So your budget seems to be very healthy. How do you stay consistently balanced? Or in your opinion, are you balanced?
We are balanced. Municipal governments are the only level of government that has to balance their budget every year, which is why you will not hear of the municipality of Ashcroft or Surrey or Fort St. James running a deficit, because we cannot by law run a deficit, unlike our federal and provincial counterparts. So every year the budget has to balance. So you go into the budget discussions, you go into budget season looking at how much money do we have, what do we need to spend money on, what are our essential services. In addition to those essential services, what would we like to do, or what do we have to do? And then you go from there. So 5 or 6 years ago, we were not in such a great position. And in early 2015, we hired Yogi Bala as our interim CFO because the position was vacant, and then he applied for the position. He's been with us ever since. He's absolutely fantastic. And one of the first things he did was he came in and he looked at where we were and where we needed to be. What was the gap? And how could we close that gap? And so over the last 5 years, under his stewardship, we've closed those gaps so that, for example, with the water and sewer, we were bringing in about half through utility bill payments what we needed to provide water and sewer. So if it cost us $500,000 a year to provide water to the citizens and businesses of Ashcroft, we were only bringing in $250,000 when people paid their utility bills. They should be self-sustaining. So we were having to take money out of reserves to balance the water account and the sewer account, and we took some tough measures to close that gap, and we have now done that. So that means that the money we were taking out of reserves, we can now use for other things, other than providing the essential services that we have to provide. So he's been absolutely wonderful at managing our money, getting the most out of every dollar, saving us money without cutting corners, to enable us not only to provide the core things that we have to provide, but some of the nice extras, if you will. You know, we have an arena, we have a curling rink, we have a pool, we have really lovely parks. And those are all things that make a community really nice to live in, but they're not things that local government is mandated to provide. We don't have to have a hockey arena or an ice arena, but we do. And so it costs a certain amount of money to keep that going, and people have indicated that they like it. It's an amenity, it's something that attracts people here. So the trick for a local government is, okay, how do we pay for those core things we have to pay for, and then how do we pay for those nice things that people like, and how can we get more nice things that people want? And sometimes with those nice things, getting them initially is not the issue, it's sustaining them over a period of years. That's where the expense comes in, so that's kind of the long-term, yes, it would be nice to have X, can we afford to build it, and then can we afford to keep running it? Because there's no point spending the money to get something up and running and then find you have no money to sustain it. So that's kind of the long-term thing, and a lot of politicians don't like to look long-term because it's scary, and it's hard to look way down the road, but you have to do that. You can't just live moment to moment.
How long in advance does your budget have to, or do you have to have a 5-year plan, or do you just, I know that you guys do have a 5-year plan, but do you have to have one, or is that just your Yogi's so good, we happen to have a 5-year plan and that's what we're looking at?
You know, you do have to have a 5-year plan, and part of that is that sustainability question. You know, okay, this year, this is the picture for this year, but what does the picture look like in 2021, 22, 23? Will you be able to sustain everything? And so that's why you have the 5-year plan. Now, obviously, you know, a community like Ashcroft, there aren't going to be huge changes in the 5-year plan the way there would be in Surrey or Vancouver or Kamloops or Kelowna, but you still have to have it because it's a very useful tool for looking down the road, especially when you come to things like asset management. You know, how much is it going to cost to continue to, you know, to provide the water sewer infrastructure, the roads, etc. So it's an important thing to be able to look at when you do the budget. And as to when you start the budget process, it really varies from community to community. I think some larger ones start it in the end of the previous year because they're talking huge, hundreds of millions of dollars budget. You know, Ashcroft, we're talking around $5 million. But the budget discussion here usually starts in February with, you know, Yogi prepares a sort of preliminary draft budget, and then we all get together as council and staff with the village foreman, and we look at the draft budget, and Yogi's factored in fixed costs like, Hydro is going to increase by X, Fortis is going to go up, our ICBC insurance is going to go up, and our building insurance is going to go up, and there's a 2% pay raise that we have to factor in. And we also get a wish list from the village foreman of things that they've identified that we have to, and it's in high priority, medium, low priority. And usually Yogi's factored into the budget all the high priority items. So one of the things that this year we've identified for next year is that we'll need a new sweeper. The sweeper we have is coming to the end of its life, and our crew is fantastic at all these pricey pieces of equipment we have for the village, keeping them going in a safe way for years and years. So that is absolutely fantastic, but there comes a point where you just can't keep it going anymore because you're running on older equipment and you can't get the parts anymore. So next year we're looking at purchasing a new sweeper. So that was kind of brought up this year just to prepare us for next year. So it's not like, oh my goodness, out of the blue. So, now we have it in our heads that that's, I think, about $350,000 expense.
Wow. So how does so there's varying levels of government. How does the municipality, especially one as small as ours, fit into the larger scheme of things?
In terms of money or finances,
how does Ashcroft fit as a puzzle piece into the province of British Columbia, I suppose?
Well, we work with other levels of government, obviously. I mentioned the water treatment plant and the grants. If we had not got the close to $5 million in grant funding from the federal and provincial governments, it would have been, I don't even know how we would have afforded a new water treatment plant. So obviously we work very closely with other levels of government, more closely with the province because so much of what we do is legislated by the province. They come out with the legislation that then we have to figure out how to work within that. So we have a really good relationship with our MLA, Jackie Taggart, our new MP, Brad Viss, very open, very easy to talk to, very approachable. So it's keeping those communications lines open so that if something comes up that we need help with at a provincial or federal level, you've got someone to go to who can advocate for you. So that's really important to build up those connections so that you know who to talk to, or you've got someone to go to. Hey, we're having this issue. Or in the case of the federal government, for example, if we're applying for a federal grant, we can go to Brad Viss and say, look, can you help us with this? Put in a word. Could you talk to the minister involved? Could you help us with the application just to make sure that we're not missing anything? So that all helps you to hopefully be more successful. The thing about municipal governments is we're the ones that are closest to the people, residents, businesses. Out of every tax dollar you spend in Canada, whether it's at the gas pumps, whether it's at the food store or at a restaurant, in your income tax, every dollar in taxes you spend, 50 cents goes to the federal government, 42 cents goes to the province, and 8 cents comes to the municipal government. And we're the ones who are right here on the ground providing, making sure you've got potable water when you turn on your tap, making sure that when you flush your toilet, it works, that you have street lights, that you have roads, that your garbage gets collected, etc. So we do all that on very little money compared to what the other levels of government get. So it's important for us to have those good relationships so that when the grants are available, we're in a good position to go for them.
So that is all of the start out questions that I have for you for just being mayor. And unless you have any secret things on the horizon that you want to talk about, just as breaking news.
Secret things, breaking news. Well, I guess the piece of breaking news is that tonight's council meeting, which is happening tonight, Tuesday, because Monday obviously was Easter Monday, We've already given our budget and 5-year financial plan first, second, and third readings. So normally at tonight's meeting, what we'd be doing is giving it final reading. Instead, what we're planning on doing is rescinding third reading and then giving third reading to a revised budget, which has been revised partly to reflect impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and also to eliminate the proposed 2.5% property tax increase. So we had, back in February when we started these discussions, decided that on a 2.5% property tax increase. And that is basically, after looking at what Yogi'd given us, and I talked about those fixed costs that go up every year that we have no control over. You know, gas prices have gone lower right now, but usually they go up. Hydro goes up, ICBC rates go up. And so over the last 5 years that I've been on council, we've consistently brought in a 2 or 2.5% tax increase, which kind of puts us within striking distance of making up those costs that go up that we can't control. And so this year with COVID-19, we looked at it and thought, we are all in this together. What can we, given that we get the least amount of money of any level of government and can't, you know, we don't have hundreds of millions or hundreds of thousands of dollars to spend the way other levels of government do. What can we do as a municipality to try and help residents and businesses and show that we are aware of what's going on, we're aware of the difficulties that many people are having and will continue to have. And so one of the, you know, the big thing we thought of was, all right, we don't increase property taxes this year. We hold it at 0, we freeze it. So talked to Yogi about it and said, could you go over the numbers and just see if we can do this? And fortunately, we are in the position that we could do that. So that's you know, something that we can do that's within our power. And then I think I've been saying now for the last little while that all the relief and assistance that's coming out for people right now is great. Where the rubber's going to hit the road is when we come out the other side of this and we're standing in the landscape looking around, dusting ourselves off, saying, okay, how do we keep moving forward now? That, I think, is where we really need to start thinking about that now. Because when that day comes, that's not the day to start thinking about, okay, how do we start picking up the pieces? The day to start thinking about that is now. So that when you can start picking up the pieces, you've got a plan in place about what it's going to look like, how you're going to do it, and who's going to be involved. So.
Well, talking about that then, and you're a very learned person, being somebody that is not just the mayor, of course, but you're also part of the media. How do you envision that? So here we are. Mm-hmm. What do you think Ashcroft's plan should be once we come out of COVID-19?
One of the first things we're going to have to do is liaise with government and other organizations like Community Futures, for example, to see what programs they're going to have in place. What funds are going to be available. I mean, a big one is the Rural Dividend Fund, which was canceled in September of 2019. And that was designed to give small rural communities funding to go ahead with projects that would help with economic stimulation, economic growth, development, attracting people to the community. And then that was canceled or postponed, or put on hold in order for the money to be shifted into helping communities that have been hit by the shutdowns in the forestry industry. So, you know, is there going to be something, is the Rural Dividend Fund going to come back? Or is there going to be something like it to help small communities that are really going to be struggling? And I think something that we're going to have to think about doing is, as a municipality here in Ashcroft, is going around to our local business, you know, finding out what programs and funding and supports are going to be available, getting that all together, going around to businesses and saying, here's information about what's available, here's what we can do, here's how to contact us if you want help or you need assistance, you know, be in touch. And I think we're going to have to get really creative with how we help support businesses in our community. I mean, something that I'm seeing is online shopping. And for years, people have been saying one of the big impacts on local shops has been people going into the big centers. You go into Kamloops or Kelowna or Prince George or wherever is closest. And you go to Costco and Walmart and Superstore and London Drugs and Shoppers and all these places. And so people, and that is a very real effect. That has a very real impact on our local businesses. But the one that people tend not to talk about as much, and I've been talking about it for a while, and it's really brought it home to me the last few weeks, is online shopping. Once people discover how nice it is to sit there at 9 o'clock at night in your pajamas at your computer and order online, wow, you can't put that toothpaste back in the tube. So I think it's going to be talking to local businesses and saying, okay, is there some way you can go to some kind of online model so that you're not only making it easy for people here to order from you, but people from outside? And this is, you know, tying back to the idea of those individual funky boutiques and shops that are unique to Ashcroft. How can you market that to the wider world? Is an online presence something you want to do? And the other thing I'm hearing right now is, what are people really craving? It's that human contact, that interaction, being able to go into a shop or a restaurant and take your time and chat with people, chat with the cashier or the clerk. And now we're being told, you know, in businesses that are still open, we're being told in the nicest possible way, please don't do that. You know, not only don't do that when you're in the shop, but don't come into the shop as often as you used to. If you used to go to Safety Mart 3 or 4 times a week, come in once a week. People are really craving that personal interaction, and that's something that our small local businesses can really do. They are in the perfect position to do that every time with every customer who walks in the door. So how can we help with that? So those are 2 things I think that we can start thinking about. What's this going to look like, and how can we build on this?
How have you seen the provincial and federal governments handling this particular crisis?
I think very well. I mean, I did reference, and it wasn't a knock on the emergency relief benefits that are coming out when I talked about, you know, it comes out looking like X, and then the next day now Y's been added to it, and then Z's been added to it, and now we're on A, B, C, D, and it's changing. And that's not a knock on the government. It's a huge, I mean, how many people have already applied for it? 2 million people?
Yeah.
Wow. You don't roll something like that out and expect it to be perfect on, 9 o'clock day one. That's not going to happen. So I think that both levels of government are doing a good job of identifying where support's needed and trying to provide that support. I think this is where we see a bit of a challenge in that we have the federal government in Ottawa, and then you've got the individual provinces and territories I guess kind of doing their own thing. So, for example, early on when the federal government was not closing the border with the United States, back when northern Washington state was a hot spot for COVID-19, and you saw the health minister here, Adrian Dix, saying, we need to close the border. You know, because we have a hot spot, miles from us, not hundreds or thousands of miles, but, 20 miles, 30 miles. And so eventually the federal government caught up with that. So that I think is where you start seeing that a bit of lag, because for example, we need to do, what the federal government needs to do for BC isn't necessarily what they need to do for PEI, right, or Nunavut. So it's trying to bring in something that addresses the very regional needs of a huge country, and that is tough at the best of times. But I mean, certainly I'm going to join the chorus of people who think that Bonnie Henry is wonderful. My new mantra is, what would Bonnie Henry do in a given situation if I'm not sure? And for example, she advised not to cut your own hair. I think that is excellent advice at any time. And you'll see I have taken her advice. I have not tried to cut my own hair. So But no, she has just been a wonderful, calm, steady voice. I have to say that the NDP government, Minister Dix, the health minister, I think is doing an admirable job. He is equally calm. And what I like about them, and I'm seeing this in a lot of politicians across Canada, and I'm not necessarily seeing this in other countries, is that they're treating Canadians like we're adults. You know, they're being adults and treating us like adults. And giving us the facts and giving them calmly, as best as they're able. It's a very rapidly changing situation. But I think that Minister Dix is doing a great job in basically letting Dr. Henry, the provincial health officer, I mean, she's the expert, let her do the talking. One of the best comments I read about this was, you know, if my town is on fire, I don't want to hear from the mayor. I want to hear from the fire chief. And I totally... And I think that we're doing a good job of basically letting the experts do the talking. You know, if you're not an epidemiologist or a virologist or a medical doctor, you know, please just step aside, step away from the microphone. I want to hear from Dr. Henry or Dr. Tam. Or.
Do you feel that the response that has taken place in Ashcroft has been appropriate? Meaning, you know, some businesses have shut down, some businesses have reduced hours. You know, people aren't allowed to go into certain businesses anymore. Do you feel that it was an appropriate response, done at an appropriate time, or could businesses have stayed open a little longer? We have no cases here at the moment, so what are your thoughts on the response of Ashcroft?
I think Ashcroft has responded really well, the businesses and the people. I think in terms of responding to the legislation coming down from the province, which is, you know, I mean, it's Dr. Bonnie Henry and as the provincial health officer telling restaurants that they have to move to takeaway only, for example, or delivery only, telling gymnasiums that they have to shut down, things like that. So businesses here in Ashcroft that have been affected by these decisions, I think have done really well in taking it, you know, seriously. You know, she tells restaurants they have to move to takeout or delivery. Our restaurants have done that. So we haven't seen pushback. I think, you know, again, that's the danger of a one-size-fits-all legislation, is that, you know, inevitably you get some businesses caught up who maybe there could be an exception. I can't think of anything in Ashcroft that leaps to mind, but I think people have responded really well. I think the response of the government has been good. As to whether it was too soon, again, I'm not an expert, but I look at the numbers and I look at where we are, and I think we're up to 50 some odd deaths in BC, and every one of those deaths is a tragedy. Every one of those deaths involves a real person with a family and friends, that so many of them have happened at long-term care facilities. Now you've got staff. I mean, I can only imagine how it would feel if it was here in Ashcroft, and how the staff would be feeling, because these people are their family. It's devastating. But we have, I think, by acting as quickly as we did, you know, we've talked about flattening the curve. I think we've done that. So by moving quickly, you know, some people might have felt we moved too quickly. Well, you know, you should have let people stay open a bit longer. If the trade-off is we close them sooner and we save more lives, that's a good trade-off. Yeah. And also stopping the spread of the infection. You know, because, you know, Dr. Henry keeps saying what we see today is going to be reflected in 10 days to 2 weeks from now. So, you know, we've got to keep it up.
Is there any last messages that you have for the people of Ashcroft?
I think be kind. Kindness goes a long way. And you see some unfortunate things on Facebook, and I totally get it. Not just Facebook, that's the one I'm on, but social media in general. And people are scared. It's a scary time. I totally get that. There's a lot of fear, uncertainty, the unknown. People don't like that. They like to be in control. You like to think you're in control of what's happening, and we're not in control of this. We can do things to try to be in control. You know, wash your hands, use lots of disinfectant, social distance or physical distancing, limit your trips to the store. So it's fairly simple stuff. But you do see amongst that, you see some unkindness in social media. And I it hurts to see that, because it takes no more effort to be kind than it takes to be unkind. In fact, I'd argue it takes less effort to be kind, because to be kind, all you have to do is say to someone, hey, how you doing? That's all it takes to be, that's being kind. Being unkind takes more work, really. And so I see that going around, and no, we don't need that. It's adding nothing. It's hurting people. It's making people more afraid and more feeling like they're out of control. So just be kind to people and keep doing what we're doing. And I think something I said to someone in the course of a discussion a couple of weeks ago was that people in our area, a lot of them went through the 2017 wildfires. And so they saw that coming together, people supporting each other, reaching out, giving a hand, picking up the phone and saying, hey, do you need anything? Do you need some help? Even if it's just some, and I shouldn't say even if it's just someone to talk to, because sometimes that can be the most important thing in the world, is having someone to talk to. So we've done this. We did it 3 years ago. So that's proof we can do it again. But we have to support each other, because it's tough. It takes a lot out of people, mentally, physically, everything. So that's again where kindness comes back in. Just be kind to people and know that we will come through this. And what it's going to look like on the other side of this, I have no idea. But I know that we need to keep standing together and being strong together when that day comes, because it's going to be a long road ahead of us, but I know that we can make it.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you coming in. And again, this was a physical distanced interview for people watching at home. So that was Mayor Barbara Roden, and all the best in this trying time.
Thank you very much.